So today I wanted to talk to you about the difference between somebody that is toxic versus somebody that is a toxic narcissist. And you might be thinking, Michele, who cares? Toxic equals toxic. It doesn't matter. But actually it does. For example, if I can't tell the difference, then that means anytime I see a toxic behavior and my brain goes to narcissist, right? Because that's kind of how it is right now. Every single thing somebody does causes them to be labeled as a narcissist. And so as a result, two things could happen. I might be burning bridges that don't need to be burned, or I might be limiting my ability by just completely labeling them as a narcissist and getting rid of them in my life. I might be limiting myself from learning and growing in healthy behaviors that every single relationship needs. And we're going to talk more about that later. So that's one of the reasons why this topic is important. And then the other reason is because narcissists can covertly cause you to think that they aren't narcissists. And then you stay in relationships that are ultimately destroying you from the inside out so long that by the end of the relationship, you don't even know who you are. So we're either getting out of them too fast and we're not learning certain healthy behaviors, or we're staying in them too long and we are destroying ourselves from the inside out. So that being said, it's an important topic to understand, especially if you want to have healthy relationships, and especially if you were in a relationship with a narcissist in the past and you don't want to be in another one. So that being said, let's dive in. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a survivor myself of childhood trauma as well as narcissistic abuse. I'm now a trauma-informed coach, a somatic experiencing practitioner, and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom with survivors from all over the world, and we put the focus on ourselves, on how the trauma is still stuck in us in the present, and we learn how to do the inner work to come back home into our bodies so that we heal from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse. So if you're looking for more personalized help on your recovery journey, make sure you check out my live weekly Zoom meetings. So let's first start with talking about the difference between someone that is toxic and a toxic narcissist. So in reference to toxic and toxic narcissists, when we're talking about toxic, we're really focusing on behaviors that can harm another person, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, financially, physically, even spiritually. A toxic person engages in behaviors that hurt other people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a personality disorder. And that's where toxic narcissists come in. There's the overlap where they also have these same toxic behaviors plus additional ones that allow them to fill the criteria of somebody having NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder. So some toxic behaviors that both a toxic person and a malignant toxic narcissist would engage in are having negative energy, being manipulative, creating a lot of drama, being very jealous, self-centered, criticize you, put you down, try to control you, spread drama, triangulation, the silent treatment, stonewalling, cheating on you, yet expecting loyalty from you, just to mention a few toxic behaviors. So again, somebody toxic would do those behaviors, and somebody with NPD would also do those behaviors. So what's the difference then? Here are some things that would really take a toxic person to that level of having NPD. And these are some characteristics taken right from the DSM. A narcissist often exhibits grandiosity, which refers to an exaggerated sense of superiority or an invulnerability that is not realistic, and it's not even based on personal capability. In fact, it's often delusional. It also refers to having an overinflated ego and a belief that you are better and superior to everyone, and that the rules simply don't apply to you. Another symptom that the toxic person may actually be a narcissist is an extreme lack of empathy. I remember a client telling me one time, she was like, Michele, I got into an argument with my narcissistic spouse, and he was so cruel and so lashing out, and the horrible things he was saying, they cut me at my core. I was literally on the floor crying. He stepped over me as if he didn't see me and was just flipping through the mail, reading the mail out loud as she was crying right there on the floor. In other words, a narcissist can do the most cruelest things, say the most horrible things, and your pain does not touch them. If somebody is toxic, and we'll talk about some reasons why that could be in a few moments, but if they are toxic but not a narcissist, they can see someone else's pain and it hurts them and bothers them. So there's a very key difference, is that lack of empathy. Another characteristic that a narcissist would have is a sense of entitlement, which is a personality trait that makes them feel as if they deserve more than what society gives them. They believe they deserve privileges, they deserve recognition for things, even if they didn't do those things. Somebody else did them, they want the credit for it. It's almost like they believe that the world owes them something in exchange for absolutely nothing. Okay, I could go on, but hopefully you're seeing that a narcissist has toxic behaviors and then some. Certain characteristics that put them in the category of having a personality disorder. So I wanted to move on to how can this information and knowing the difference help you in your relationships? In the beginning of the video, I mentioned how sometimes we might leave. In other words, at the first sign of a behavior that could be harmful, we amputate that relationship. And that can be a disservice to ourselves. For example, let's say I meet somebody and we're developing a friendship and I put down a boundary and they push that boundary. That's an unhealthy behavior, right? Narcissists do not respect boundaries. Does that mean that every time somebody tries to cross a boundary that they're a narcissist? Well, if I simply amputate every relationship, anytime I notice somebody crossing a boundary, I am never developing the ability to enforce my boundaries. I am never strengthening the ability to stay grounded in me when somebody's upset with my boundary. Setting and enforcing boundaries is a healthy relationship skill that we need to develop in order to maintain healthy relationships with others. But if we exit every time somebody tries to cross our boundaries, we're really not learning how to enforce boundaries in a way that helps us to maintain healthy relationships. And so this is where we start noticing, well, maybe that person has a toxic behavior of not respecting boundaries. Well, what do we do then? You stay in alignment with healthy relationship skills, which is enforcing boundaries. How they respond to that is going to show you, is this a relationship that I want to stay in or not? Now, I know with myself, when I was in a long-term relationship with somebody that I feel was high on the scale of NPD, the reality is that I myself had unhealthy behaviors. For example, I said yes when I wanted to say no. If I put down a boundary and somebody else got upset, I fawned and I stopped caring about my needs and I tried to make the other person happy. When I first came out of that relationship, I didn't have the skills to maintain my boundaries when somebody else was upset. It was too uncomfortable in my body. Well, real healing for me was about building the capacity to be able to stay myself, to be able to enforce boundaries even if somebody wasn't happy with them, simply because I knew that that's what was best for myself. And so I'm sharing this because at that time of my life when I came out of that narcissistic relationship and I started to change, right? Because I started to develop these healthy skills. Some of my friends had a hard time with it because they were used to the old Michele, the Michele that didn't care about herself, that put everyone first and herself last on the list. And when I started to raise myself to be at the same level as everyone else, some didn't like it. And that resulted in a change of relationships. They didn't want to be around the healthier version of me, and that was okay. However, there were some people that in the beginning, it was new for them, and so it was uncomfortable for them to realize, oh, wait, Michele said no. That doesn't mean that she doesn't care about our friendship. It just means that this is what's important to her. As I began respecting myself, those former unhealthy relationships started to get healthy. So that's why I say, like, certain toxic behaviors in certain people can be changed if it's just a toxic behavior and they don't have NPD. However, this is a slippery slope because if we're not careful, we can take this knowledge and then stay stuck too long in relationships that are with toxic narcissists. So let's shift into how to tell the difference. What we have to be careful of now is the informed or educated narcissist. Decades ago, no one knew, or very few people, I should say, knew how people with NPD were affecting other people. And then about 10 years ago, it exploded, right? We started to understand what was happening, and that information has been so helpful. So many of us have been able to get unmeshed from these unhealthy relationships. I was talking to people in the School of Transformation a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling them, I feel like narcissistic abuse or narcissistic relationships are like two people that make up one personality. And so the information that we learned helped many of us. I know with myself, it helped me to separate and come into my own body and be my own person. But the narcissist learned as well. And this is where it can get confusing. You see, toxic behaviors can be changed. However, somebody with NPD normally doesn't change. And the reason they don't change isn't necessarily a lack of ability as much as a refusal to self-reflect, right? We can't fix what we don't acknowledge is broken. And narcissists don't self-reflect, and so they don't change. But the educated narcissist can make it look like they changed. For example, have you ever noticed that when you have one foot out the door is when the narcissist changes and suddenly either stops doing what has been so painful or tosses a little crumb of nice behavior, and suddenly we're thinking they changed, right? Because narcissists can't change, but look, the narcissist actually said, I'm sorry. The narcissist actually apologized. The narcissist actually did something nice, so they can't be a narcissist. But is that true? And if not, how can you tell? As educated as narcissists are becoming, their education is only surface level or skin deep. And what I mean by that is they may learn what they're doing to get caught, and they may hide certain overt behaviors, or they might change certain things to make it look like they changed. For example, with an apology. Narcissists don't apologize, right? But then a narcissist apologizes, they're not a narcissist. Well, the way you can tell is, are their words and their actions on the same page? Because a narcissist can learn what to say, but since they're never willing to change who they are on the inside, it's going to show up with their actions. There's going to be a huge discrepancy between their words and their actions. So if a narcissist apologizes to you and you're like, oh, maybe they're not a narcissist because they did this thing that narcissists don't do, you want to ask yourself, one, are their actions on the same page? Two, something else that you want to look for is what happens when you start believing it. So for example, when a narcissist does do their change, it usually is very short-lived, and it usually changes back to their old behavior the second you're all in. You see, the narcissist reels you in and spits you out to their convenience. And so when you have one foot out the door, they will show this change. And if you're anything like me and you've been through narcissistic abuse for a long time, you don't believe it right away, but you don't leave. So there's like this time period of like watching and seeing like, is this behavior going to stay? And guess what? It does stay for a little while. But the secret that you want to watch for, so that you don't get fooled into thinking that this is real change, you want to watch for, does this change continue even when you're all in? Even when you believe and trust them now, like they've been staying at this new behavior for a while, so now you trust it. Does that new behavior stay even when you're trusting it? Or is it the second you begin to trust it, they go back to being who they were before? This is a classic sign of the abuse cycle. Something that helped me was to keep track of how long the good cycle or the happy cycle stayed and how long the absolute flip side and miserable side stayed, because that's the two sides of narcissistic relationships. They bring you like a roller coaster way up high, only to plunge you way down low, to reel you back in, to do it all over again. And I realized that for a long time, we were on a 2-week cycle. 2 weeks amazing, 2 weeks of horror. As I began learning about narcissistic abuse, that cycle began to extend. It went to 3 weeks, to 4 weeks of amazing, 4 weeks of horror. What was causing it to extend was I wasn't trusting it so quickly anymore. And the scary thing is the narcissist is in it for the long con, and they can wait you out. The second I would trust it again, it would go right back to that cycle all over again. And then it would take me just as long as the good cycle lasted. So it was 4 weeks of good cycle. It would take me 4 weeks to untangle the mess of the 4 weeks of horror to get back to that place where I wanted to put down that boundary, again. Really look at the patterns of the relationship. If they're saying sorry, but the patterns stay the same, there is no growth in the relationship, there is no learning from the past, only repetition of the past, then you're probably with somebody with NPD and not just somebody that has toxic behaviors. Okay. So regardless of whether you are in a relationship with somebody that has some toxic behaviors or somebody that has NPD, getting healthy relationship skills for yourself is what is vital. For example, the first thing that is needed to learn how to do is to set boundaries, enforce boundaries, and to be able to stay in what you know is right and best for you, even when somebody else is having a tantrum and getting upset and trying to make you feel like you're this horrible person for simply caring about your needs. The second tip I want to give you, whether you're dealing with a toxic person or a narcissist, is to begin learning the healthy behavior skill of not taking something personally. For example, one of the things that causes us to lose ourselves in toxic relationships, to absolutely come out a shell of a person confused with who we are, is when we internalize or personalize their behavior. I'll give you an example. When I was in a relationship with somebody that was high on the scale of NPD, and they would engage in the behavior of the silent treatment. That's a horrible, painful behavior to be the recipient of, right? For anybody, whether you had childhood trauma or not, nobody likes to be treated like the living dead. However, if you internalize it and personalize it, not only do you get the pain of that rude behavior, but you also make it mean something painful about yourself. In my case, I didn't even realize it. My nervous system took over because it was so overwhelming for my body to be in this consistently chaotic situation. And when I would get the silent treatment, it felt like a life or death situation. My nervous system would be in fight, where I would get overreactive, or I would fawn. I would forget anything that meant anything to me and try to do whatever was needed to make that other person happy. Or I'd be in freeze, where my body was here, who knows where I was, right? And the reason for that was because I didn't even realize my nervous system was making it mean when he ignores me for whether hours, days, sometimes weeks, and even months, that means I'm unlovable and bad. When I realized it, and I was like, that doesn't mean that. But while it was in my subconscious, I couldn't change it, and it was causing me to go into my trauma responses. So learning how to not personalize it is vital in any relationship that we're in, but especially if we're in relationships that have toxic behaviors or have somebody with NPD. Tip number 3, if you're especially dealing with somebody with NPD, you want to get a support system. It's very difficult to heal alone because you're dealing with somebody that is rewriting history and rewriting your self-image. They're going to tell you what you feel. They're going to tell you who you are as you're trying to come back into yourself and be yourself. And it can be extremely confusing when it's just your perspective and the narcissist, and you've been trained to not trust yourself. So getting outside help is extremely helpful. That being said, I want to encourage you, if you're looking for more consistent live support and my videos resonate with you, come join me live weekly on Zoom. This is where we do the inner work to come back into our body, to gain agency so that we can develop a healthy relationship with ourselves that then extends to our relationships externally. And the last tip is to know when to walk away. Right? People that have toxic behaviors can change. However, there comes the moment when you need to evaluate, as you're getting more healthy and exhibiting healthier behaviors, is this person draining your energy? Are they disrespecting you in such a way that is damaging to you? Are they consistently pushing your boundaries and your limits beyond reasonableness? And is this draining you of your own energy? And at that moment, you have to look at your friendships, your relationships, and say, is this good for me? Or is this causing me emotional, physical, psychological, biological, because there's a biology to trauma, spiritual, financial trauma. So to sum it up, toxic people have harmful behaviors but they might not realize it. And I'll save why they might be like that for another video. Whereas narcissists have deeper issues rooted in a personality disorder, making them so much harder to deal with. Knowing this is going to help protect yourself and build healthier, happier relationships. So have you ever dealt with somebody toxic or narcissistic? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video if you found it helpful, and don't forget to come join me live on Zoom if you're looking to deepen your healing.